G'day! My name's RJ, and welcome to Killer Canuck, a recurring segment here on RUE MORGUE TV. After his controversial yet undisputed success with Shivers in 1975, David Cronenberg was ready to keep the ball rolling on his career. Dunning, Link, and Reitman were all eager and excited to support him, but the CFDC was still hesitant after the PR nightmare they had just gone through. Luckily for everyone, the executive director of the CFDC at that time was a man named Michael Spencer, and he recognized Cronenberg's talent. Let's take a look at 1977's Rabid. Spencer, who was hired by John Grierson to work for the National Film Board as Director of Planning, is unofficially credited as being the architect of the Canadian Film Development Corporation, and was named as its first executive director. During his 10-year stint from 1969 to 1979, he oversaw the funding of several cardinal Canadian classics, such as Ted Kotcheff's The Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz, Michel Breuil's Léard, and Don Chabeb's Going Down the Road. It was under him that the CFDC relented and funded Shivers, and it would be under him that they would fund Rabid. After Cronenberg's landlady kicked him out of his Kensington apartment when she learned that he was responsible for Shivers, John Dunning put him up in his summer house in the country outside of Montreal to write. Originally titled Mosquito, Cronenberg got to work on the script for Rabid, though recalls that he leaned heavily on Dunning and Reitman near the completion of it for support, fearing that everyone would laugh at it. Operating as a sort of companion piece to Shivers, Rabid delivers a similar premise and ups the ante from an apartment building to an entire city. The CFDC provided $200,000 of the $530,000 budget, and they cross-collateralized the funding with a movie that was to be called Convoy, which ultimately fell through. Rabid, released in 1977, opens with a couple, Rose and Hart, out driving on their motorcycle in the Quebec countryside, looking for a place to happen, making stops along the way. Hart is played by Newfie actor Frank Moore, and Rose is played by Marilyn Chambers, a household name at that time for having starred in the porno chic film Behind the Green Door in 1972. The one-time face of Ivory Snow soap, until the company learned about her filmography. Chambers was looking to break from the X-rated scene and trying to make it as a legitimate actor. Chambers was not Cronenberg's first pick. He wanted Sissy Spacek after seeing her in Terrence Malick's Badlands in 1973, but Cinepix weren't keen on her freckles and Texas accent. Ivan Reitman met with Chambers after seeing her interviewed on late night cable, thinking that the casting of a porn star would catch the eye of worldwide distributors. While it's uncertain whether Spacek would have accepted the part, just before Rabid went to camera saw the release of Brian De Palma's Carrie in 1976, making her a household name among horror fans, and would have made her a massive pickup for Cinepix. A terrible three-point turn and a lead foot causes the motorcycle to fly off the road, launching Hart and landing on Rose's abdomen before exploding. This explosion is witnessed by patients at the Keloid Plastic Surgery Clinic just down the road, run by, who else, Dr. Dan Keloid.
I just sure as hell don't want to become the Colonel Sanders of plastic surgery.
Played by Canadian actor Howard Reichman. Dr. Keloid's name is a pun on keloid, which is a medical term for scar tissue. They rip out to the scene of the accident in their wicked lime green ambulance. Hart has suffered minor injuries and can be sent to the hospital, but Rose's injuries are far too severe and she will not survive the 3-hour trip to the closest hospital in Montreal, so they bring her back to the clinic to operate on her there. The clinic, whose lobby was actually the headquarters of Lipton Tea, sees a cameo and final appearance from Cronenberg collaborator Ronald Mlodzik.
You think they could cover it with a sheet or something?
Rose's abdomen and intestines have been so badly damaged that Dr. Keloid resorts to an experimental surgery to save her life. He implements what he calls neutral field tissue, taking a graft from her thigh and neutralizing it so they can use it on her intestines in the hopes that they will grow and repair themselves on their own, sort of like stem cells. David Cronenberg watched a plastic surgeon for 3 hours to prepare for this scene. The operation is a success, but it puts Rose in a coma. Hart gets driven to the hospital by Murray Cypher, played by returning Shivers actor Joe Silver. A full month passes before Rose wakes up screaming one night. She's tended to by Lloyd, a patient at the clinic recovering from a facelift, who's played by Canadian actor Roger Perriar. He calms her down and she gets uncomfortably physical with him.
Now look, this is really weird.
She wraps her arms around him and he starts to yell in pain before we see blood pouring from his midriff. He gets examined by Dr. Keloid saying he doesn't remember the attack, but that his entire right side is numb. Keloid takes a blood sample before sending Lloyd to the hospital. Rose has fallen back unconscious and Dr. Keloid checks on the grafts, seeing that they're healing well. Later that night, Rose wakes again. She steals a coat and heads out into the dark 1970s Quebec countryside, stopping at a barn. She cuddles up close to a cow laying in the hay and gives it a bit of a side hug for just a moment before throwing up blood. The owner of the barn returns drunk and threateningly approaches Rose. She defends herself by throwing the armpit at him and escapes while he rolls on the ground in pain. She returns to the clinic and tries to call Hart, but he doesn't answer. He's in the garage working on his totaled bike and listening to Marilyn Chambers' song Benihana on the radio. This disconnect between Rose and Hart is a running theme throughout the film. They have a few near misses and communicate mostly through the phone, something that Cronenberg predicted accurately about the future. Lloyd packs up to leave the hospital, looking like he maybe shouldn't be in such a rush to do so. His roommate, a true Canadian, offers to cover for him.
Night nurse comes around, I'll tell her you're in the can, eh?
This is actor Bob Silverman, who would return for Cronenberg in Scanners in 1981 and Naked Lunch in 1991. He takes a taxi back to the Keloid clinic. The cab, however, is driven by Marcel Fournier, so we know right away that they aren't going to make it. Lloyd takes a hearty bite out of the driver, and the pair participate in a spectacular car stunt before being plowed into by a truck traveling through the underpass. David Cronenberg operated one of the cameras during this stunt using a telephoto lens. As the car was sliding towards him, he thought, wow, that looks pretty close. And when he stepped back, he realized that the car had stopped mere feet from him. Any farther would have taken out both him and the camera. Rose calls Hart again, and this time he answers. She asks him to come and get her. Hart, whose means of transportation is currently in pieces, calls Murray for a lift. He's watching a Cinepix classic, Across the Land with Stompin' Tom Connors.
See how Potato Man loves Ketchup Man?
Murray agrees to drive him. Dr. Keloid checks on Rose's grafts and finds that she has a new, orifice in her armpit, and that it's home to a new, phallus. The neutral field tissue grafts that Dr. Keloid used in Rose's surgery affected her in a way that no one anticipated. Because Rose only has a small section of intestines left, her body can't properly digest food, so the grafts evolved to support the body themselves, operating similarly to a vampire bat, surviving solely on the blood of others, specifically human blood. Keloid gives Rose a hug in support, and she responds affectionately by jabbing him in the abdomen with her underarm graboid. The farmer that attacked Rose earlier, rather the farmer that got attacked by Rose earlier, stops into a diner.
Did you know you're bleeding?
He goes on a rabid rampage and attacks the waitress. Dr. Keloid scrubs in to perform surgery. He shakily stitches his patient before asking the other doctor for the scissors. She hands them to him and he chops her fingers off and sucks on the blood pouring out before moving on to attack the anesthesiologist. During the ensuing chaos, Rose steals clothes and sneaks out of the clinic. Hart and Murray arrive at the clinic, which is now occupied by the police. Hart asks around for Rose, but they tell him that she isn't there. Murray cooperates with the police, who introduce him to the now rabid Dr. Keloid. The pair are brought to the police station where they are forced to quarantine, not for 14 days, but at least overnight. Rose hitchhikes with a truck driver named Smooth Eddie, played by Canadian actor Gary McKeon, who would return for Cronenberg in The Brood in 1979. He offers her a beef sandwich, which her body promptly rejects. He does eventually feed her something that she can keep down, and the truck is found pulled over on the side of the road. The truck is approached by a cop, played by another Cronenberg alumni, Jack Messenger, who was in Stereo and Crimes of the Future, and would return in Scanners and The Dead Zone. Quebec Bureau of Health official, the very Quebecois Claude Lapointe, played by Montreal actor Victor Daisy, who, like practically everyone else in this film, would return for a role in Scanners, informs the viewer that the virus seems to be a strain of rabies, and that there is currently no cure. He asks the citizens to socially distance themselves from the saliva of others, because that's how the virus spreads.
Don't let anybody bite you.
Smooth Eddie's boss asks around for him.
Didn't look too good.
What do you mean he didn't look too good? Smooth Eddie always looks good.
Before looking for him in the back, Smooth Eddie attacks his boss and reminds another employee that he knows what he did last summer before being taken down. In quarantine, Hart calls his and Rose's good friend Mindy, the film debut of Edmonton's Susan Roman. Roman has since had an extensive voice acting career, most notably as Sailor Jupiter in the English dub of Sailor Moon. Hart asks if she has heard from Rose, and Mindy responds that Rose is in fact on her way over. Now with a destination, Hart needs only wait for the quarantine to lift before he can finally be reunited with his girlfriend. While waiting, he, Murray, and the chief of police are attacked by an officer who's been infected by the rabies virus, before he's put down with a shotgun. Rose arrives at Mindy's place and, after a quick hello, promptly leaves. She roams the streets in a now iconic fur coat, looking for someone on which to feed. She subconsciously decides that if she has to feed on people, then she's going to feed on people who she deems might be more deserving, and stops into the Eve, a porno theater playing such classics as Models for Pleasure and Party Swapers. She's in there not even 2 minutes before she's harassed by one of the patrons. She coyly tells him that she likes coming to these types of movies, but that strange men always come up and bother her. Not taking the hint to his own detriment, the man offers to sit with her to protect her, while the predator becomes the prey when he reaches into her blouse. Rose leaves the theater and heads back to Mindy's place, passing a cheeky Carrie poster on the way. The next morning, Mindy bids adieu to a writhing Rose, and gets aboard a subway car full of curious extras. Here she bears witness to a rabies attack. Mondays, am I right? In response to the growing pandemic, the city of Montreal is placed under martial law, and armed soldiers take to the streets. This is a direct homage to the October Crisis, and it's no coincidence that this doctor looks and talks like Pierre Elliott Trudeau.
Shooting down the victims is as good a way of handling them as we have got.
For those unfamiliar with the history of the October Crisis, the Front de Libération du Québec, or the FLQ, were a separatist terrorist group who kidnapped and subsequently murdered Deputy Premier Pierre Laporte in October of 1970. This prompted then Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau to invoke the use of the War Measures Act, the only ever use of it during peacetime, to deal with the separatist threat. Marilyn Chambers' character is actually named after two of the FLQ kidnappers, brothers Paul and Jacques Rose. With their overnight quarantine lifted, Hart and Murray head out for Mindy's place. Rose's hunger pangs lead her to the mall. She's in there not even 1 minute before she's harassed by wow, what an outfit.
Sure is nice, eh, Christmas?
Her buffoon quarter doesn't even have a light for the cigarette he offered her, and when he goes to get one, oh man, he definitely practiced this cool guy walk. He's attacked by a man who was attacked on the subway. The rabid subway patron is run down by one of the armed guards in the mall, who uses his Red Ryder machine gun to shoot his, and sadly Santa's, eye out. Hart and Murray finally arrive in Montreal in the midst of the chaos in the streets. Murray asks Hart to drop him off at his house to check on his wife before he goes to find Rose. Hart obliges and Murray searches his home for his wife and child. This type of horror in the home was still uncommon in Canada in 1977, and the imagery of the bloody bassinet is pretty stark. Murray is ultimately done in by his rabid wife, who was hanging out in the closet for some reason. Hart makes his way timidly through the streets of Montreal, sneaking a peek at the Canada's Canadad cameo on the hood of a car. He arrives at Mindy's place but is too late, opening the door to find Rose mid-feed on their friend. He concludes that Rose has been the typhoid Mary of this whole epidemic, and the two get into a screaming match.
You carry the plague! You've killed hundreds of people!
The shouting boils over with Rose accidentally knocking Hart down the stairs and hitting his head, rendering him unconscious. Rose heads down to the lobby. Rose heads down to the lobby. Rose heads down to the lobby, and comes across a man reading the newspaper. Deciding to take matters into her own hands, she invites him upstairs. This man is actually played by filmmaker Alan Moyle, who would go on to direct several films through the 90s and 2000s, such as Pump Up the Volume and New Waterford Girl. Hart comes to and heads back to Mindy's apartment, where he receives a call from Rose. She explains to him that she's going to prove that she isn't to blame for the deaths of all these people. She has fed on the man that she brought upstairs, and she intends to sit with him to make sure that he doesn't show any signs of rabies. Hart begs her to leave, telling her that what she's doing is suicide. She tries to comfort him, but as her rabid machination lumbers toward her, the line goes dead, and Hart screams and smashes the phone to pieces. A bitter end to a fruitless chase. The artist as monster author William Beard calls Hart a true Canadian hero, insofar as he is completely ineffectual. He literally does nothing the entire movie other than get 2 concussions and talk on the phone. He doesn't even drive himself half the time. The film concludes with Rose's body being unceremoniously thrown in the back of a garbage truck. Just another one for the pile in the wake of the epidemic. Rabid has that distinct Cronenbergian quality of being sexual without being sexy. Would the movie have been better with Sissy Spacek in the lead? Probably in some ways, but the casting of Marilyn Chambers gives it something different. She plays the role with the innocent girl next door naivete that's required, but with the hovering audience knowledge of Behind the Green Door present in every frame. Cronenberg thought she performed very well and was surprised that she never went on to do more straight films. Rabid would be Cronenberg's last film with Cinepix. His next movie would be 1979's Fast Company, the outlier in his early filmography as far as genre is concerned, but focusing on another of Cronenberg's passions: cars, motorcycles, and racing. Working on Fast Company, he would meet cinematographer Mark Irwin, with whom he would work until 1988's Dead Ringers, on which he would utilize Peter Suchitsky, who has been behind the camera for Cronenberg ever since. He also met Carol Spire, who would collaborate on almost all of Cronenberg's work, first as an art director and then as a production designer starting with Dead Ringers. And finally, he met Ronald Sanders, who has since been his career-long editor. 1979 would also see the release of The Brood, Cronenberg's most personal film, and one that helps balance the lack of horror present in Fast Company. 2019 saw the release of the first ever remake of one of David Cronenberg's works, a modern take on Rabid from a very different set of eyes, directed by Canadian twins Jen and Sylvia Soska. Though I'm surprised that it took this long for someone to give his work another crack, it is refreshing to see that it was done by fellow Canadians. With the Rabid remake in the books and a Dead Ringers series on the way, we could be headed towards a Cronenbergian horror renaissance. David's next film is a reimagining of one of his early avant-garde productions, Crimes of the Future, and if he doesn't continue the charge after that, well, then his son Brandon certainly seems poised to take up the mantle. Until next time, I've been RJ, this has been Killer Canuck, and thanks for watching. Hey folks, RJ here. Thanks for watching this episode of Killer Canuck. Just want to give a huge thanks to the folks here at RUE MORGUE for hosting this series on their channel. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at RealKillerCanuck. If you like the tune playing in the background, be sure to check out Prodigy on SoundCloud and over at noiserecords.com. There'll be a link in the description below. Let me know if there's a Canadian horror movie you think I should cover. Until next time.